Stop scrolling. What I'm about to reveal will make you sick to your stomach and grateful you weren't born as a woman 3,000 years ago. The brutal punishments that ancient civilizations inflicted specifically on women were so horrific that modern torture methods look merciful in comparison. While men faced execution and physical punishment, women throughout history endured something far worse: systematic torture designed specifically to break their spirit, destroy their dignity, and serve as warnings to other women who dared step out of line. I'm about to expose the most disturbing, brutal, and psychologically devastating punishments that ancient civilizations created exclusively for women. These weren't quick deaths or simple physical pain. These were elaborate torture systems designed to maximize suffering while keeping the victim alive for as long as possible. From ancient Rome to medieval Europe, from the Aztec Empire to ancient China, every civilization developed their own unique methods of tormenting women who were accused of adultery, witchcraft, disobedience, or simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. What makes this even more disturbing is that many of these punishments were considered entertainment for the masses. Entire communities would gather to watch women being tortured, treating their suffering like a festival or celebration. But before we dive into this dark journey through history's most brutal treatment of women, make sure to subscribe, because this type of content gets heavily restricted by algorithms that don't want you learning about the real horrors of human history. Let me start with the most unbelievable punishment that will make you question everything you thought you knew about ancient justice. Here's something that will absolutely shock you. Throughout medieval Europe, women who spoke too much, argued with their husbands, or expressed opinions were subjected to a torture device called the Scold's Bridle, also known as the Branks. Ha! This wasn't just a simple gag. It was a sophisticated torture device designed to cause maximum pain while publicly humiliating the victim. The device consisted of an iron framework that completely encased a woman's head, with a metal plate or spike that was forced into her mouth, pressing down on her tongue. But here's where it gets truly horrific. The spikes weren't just meant to prevent speech. They were designed to lacerate the tongue and inner mouth, causing continuous bleeding and excruciating pain. Some versions had bells attached, so the victim would ring like an animal as she walked through town. The psychological torture was even worse than the physical pain. Women were forced to wear these devices for hours, days, or even weeks while performing their daily tasks. They had to cook, clean, and care for their families while being unable to speak, eat properly, or drink water without intense pain. Entire communities would mock and humiliate women wearing the Scold's Bridle. Children were encouraged to throw things at them, and adults would follow them through streets, laughing at their suffering. The device turned the victim into a public spectacle of shame and pain. What makes this particularly disturbing is that the crime was often nothing more than defending themselves against abusive husbands, asking questions in church, or expressing opinions about local politics. Women were tortured simply for having voices and using them. The long-term effects were devastating. Many women suffered permanent damage to their tongues and mouths, making speech difficult or impossible for the rest of their lives. Others developed severe psychological trauma, becoming completely silent even after the device was removed. Records from medieval England show that some women wore Scold's bridles for so long that the metal became embedded in their flesh, requiring surgical removal that often resulted in further mutilation or death from infection. Green wood was used to create thick smoke that would suffocate victims slowly, while the flames were kept low enough to burn feet and legs first, working gradually upward. Crowds would gather from surrounding towns and villages, treating witch burnings like religious festivals. Vendors sold food, religious leaders gave sermons, and families brought children to witness what happened to women who stepped outside acceptable behavior. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. Many of the women burned as witches were healers, midwives, or simply women who had inherited property that men wanted. The accusations of witchcraft were often economic or personal vendettas disguised as religious justice. Some regions developed competitive witch-burning cultures where communities tried to outdo each other in the creativity and brutality of their executions. Records describe women being burned with green branches to increase smoke, having limbs broken before burning to prevent escape attempts, and being covered in flammable substances to intensify the flames. The psychological impact on communities was immense. Women lived in constant terror, knowing that any neighbor could accuse them of witchcraft based on jealousy, property disputes, or simple personal grudges. This fear effectively controlled entire female populations through the threat of torture and execution. Now let's travel back to ancient Rome, where the treatment of women reached levels of systematic brutality that were literally written into law. Roman civilization created legal frameworks that allowed, encouraged, and celebrated the torture of women for a wide range of crimes. Roman law gave husbands and fathers absolute power over women in their families, including the legal right to torture and execute them without trial. This wasn't just social custom, it was official government policy that treated women as property to be disposed of at will. Women accused of adultery faced a punishment called exposure. They were stripped naked and chained in public squares where anyone could assault, torture, or abuse them however they wanted. This could continue for days or weeks until the woman died from injuries, exposure, or infection. But the Romans developed even more creative punishments for women who challenged social order. Female slaves who attempted escape were subjected to crucifixion, but with modifications designed to increase suffering and sexual humiliation. They were often crucified naked, with nails driven through specific parts of their anatomy to maximize pain while keeping them alive longer. The arena provided another venue for torturing women as public entertainment. Female criminals, slaves, or prisoners of war were forced to fight wild animals, but unlike male gladiators, they were given no weapons or armor. The goal wasn't combat, it was watching women be torn apart by lions, bears, or other predators while crowds cheered. Roman historians describe elaborate execution spectacles, where women were tied to stakes and covered with honey to attract insects, buried up to their necks in sand filled with flesh-eating ants, or sewn into animal skins and thrown to wild dogs. These weren't quick executions. They were designed to provide hours of entertainment for Roman citizens. The legal system ensured that women had no protection or recourse. They couldn't own property, couldn't testify in courts, and couldn't seek protection from abuse. Any woman who tried to assert legal rights could be declared insane and subjected to medical treatment that was actually systematic torture designed to break her spirit. What makes Roman treatment of women particularly horrific is how systematic and bureaucratic it was. There were official guidelines for different types of female punishment, professional torturers who specialized in women, and detailed records kept of the most effective methods for breaking different types of female resistance. Here's something that will make you physically ill. Ancient China developed a punishment system for women so brutal and long-lasting that it literally crippled entire generations of females for over 1,000 years. Foot binding wasn't just a cultural practice. It was a systematic method of torturing female children to ensure they could never run away, fight back, or live independently. The process began when girls were as young as 4 or 5 years old, when their bones were still soft enough to be permanently deformed. The torture process was incredibly specific and brutal. The 4 smaller toes on each foot were broken and folded under the foot, then bound so tightly with cloth strips that blood circulation was cut off. The arch of the foot was broken, and the foot was folded in half, creating the desired lotus shape that was actually a deformed, rotting appendage. But here's the most disturbing part. This torture continued for years. As the girl grew, the bindings had to be tightened regularly, re-breaking bones that tried to heal and ensuring the feet remained permanently crippled. Many girls died from infections, gangrene, or shock during this process. The pain was described as excruciating and constant. Girls couldn't walk properly, couldn't run, and often couldn't stand for long periods without intense pain. This wasn't an unintended consequence, it was the deliberate goal. Crippled women couldn't escape, couldn't work outside the home, and were completely dependent on male family members. Chinese society treated foot binding as a mark of beauty and status, but records from the period describe the reality. Women with bound feet lived in constant pain, had frequent infections, and often couldn't perform basic tasks without assistance. Many developed severe psychological problems from years of chronic pain and immobility. The torture extended beyond the physical. Women with bound feet were essentially prisoners in their own homes. They couldn't flee abusive husbands, couldn't seek work to support themselves, and couldn't even escape during fires, floods, or other emergencies that required mobility. Ancient Chinese punishments for women also included other forms of systematic torture. Women accused of infidelity could be subjected to pig basket torture, being sewn into a leather sack with wild pigs and thrown into water where they would be torn apart as they drowned. The most elite Chinese families developed competitive foot binding, trying to achieve the smallest possible feet, regardless of the suffering involved. Some women's feet were bound so tightly that toes completely rotted off, bones fused into unrecognizable shapes, and walking became impossible without constant support. So there you have it, the shocking and disturbing reality of how ancient civilizations systematically tortured women throughout history. These weren't isolated incidents or rare punishments. They were accepted, legal, and often celebrated practices that affected millions of women across thousands of years. What makes this even more horrifying is that these punishments were specifically designed to target women, using their gender as both the justification and the method of torture. Every civilization found ways to make women suffer that went far beyond simple execution or physical punishment. The psychological impact of these practices extended far beyond the individual victims. Entire societies of women lived in constant terror, knowing that any accusation, any perceived slight, or any attempt at independence could result in torture that would make death seem merciful. This is the dark reality of human history that most people never learn about. While we study wars and politics, the systematic torture and oppression of half the human population gets ignored or sanitized in history books. If this video opened your eyes to the brutal realities of how women were treated throughout history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this with people who need to understand the real cost of historical traditions and social systems. What shocked you most about today's revelations? Let me know in the comments below, and remember, understanding this dark history is essential to ensuring it never happens again. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll explore even more disturbing truths about ancient civilizations that they don't want you to know.